Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tech Champions. I'm your host, Daniel Beaty, CTO with AuditMax in Jacksonville, Florida. As you know, we take time each week to sit down with thought leaders and industry experts in the field of technology. We hear about their journey and their mission and get their take on the latest trends in the industry. We always have great guests on the show. Today is no exception. Joining us from Sparta, New Jersey is Rocky Martinez. Rocky, welcome to the show.
Daniel, thank you. Thank you for having me today.
You're very welcome. Glad you could come on. So you are currently CTO at SmartStream Technologies, but give us a little bit of your background and some of your journey to this point.
Sure. I actually started out as I wanted to be a trader in finance. When I graduated university, I quickly realized that was a father-son business and I needed another way to get into the industry. And I basically went through the technology ranks. I went through the famed Merrill Lynch Corporate Systems program, and I was at Merrill Lynch for about 6 years. And then I realized that I wanted to build software and not maintain stuff that was written 20 years ago. So I went into the software world, and I've been there ever since, mainly in finance and telecommunications.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That sounds like a fun journey.
It has been.
So 2020 is now over. I think everybody's pretty excited about that. I know I am. And we've heard a lot about this new normal and what that might be like. And so everybody's obviously had to pivot this year in different ways, especially in IT. What do you see as permanent changes in the field of technology? What's part of this new normal that we should be getting used to?
Well, I think the new normal is not having everybody in the same buildings or the same structures as we did up to last year. It was very common for senior managers who wanted to have all their people in similar areas or in the same buildings for whatever reasons. I think this year proved that expensive office space is not necessarily the way to incentivize people to work, and you get a larger pool of people. I know myself, we've employed people this year that we traditionally wouldn't have employed because they were in other locations. But now you have the ability to hire the best and the greatest wherever they are. And we prove that we can be productive and have that and get that done.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And even our company at AuditMax, our leadership was had a pretty vested interest in getting everybody back to the office as soon as we could. But that really changed because we saw productivity at pre-COVID levels or above, because people are actually devoting more time and they're giving back some of that commute, and the productivity did not drop; it actually went up. So we're looking to see how we might want to change that. Wouldn't want to be in commercial real estate right now. Not a lot of leases getting renewed, but so let's change gears a minute and talk about this concept that you've mentioned of IT as a monolith. I want you to talk through that. Why is that a negative, and what changes should modern IT be considering?
So when I talk about IT as a monolith, the problem is you end up with two types of thoughts. One is not built here syndrome, and two, we've all grown up, well, some of us in the right age group grew up with, well, you don't get fired for hiring IBM or Microsoft or one of the bigger companies. And what that generates or creates is a lack of innovation because you're waiting for a third or fourth party to do innovation for you. So if you can slowly, I don't want to say crumble the monolith, but you want to make sure that you have the ability to take the best and greatest from every part that's available. And you get the REST API movement, the microservices movement, products like GraphQL that are allowing companies to take data whenever they need it, however they need it, without creating a massive amount of infrastructure. So I know us at the RDU, at SmartStream RDU, we're doing a big push this year to release our APIs so that large and small companies can get access to what traditionally was the top 10% of the banks. So as long as they have the licensing, they can get data that will help them create better algorithms, service customers faster, deal with regulation without spending an inordinate amount of money. And by breaking down systems to the components that need to function and destroying that single one-built monolith, you can innovate and go much faster than we traditionally have in the last 20 or 30 years in this business.
Gotcha. I like that. I like that. And you mentioned the word innovation. Let's camp out there for a minute. We hear a lot about innovation. It's kind of a theme that we hear a lot about in IT, but what are some things that are holding back IT from innovating right now?
So there's a couple of things. One is the traditional IT leadership, and these thoughts aren't mine. They're of my mentors and people I've learned from over the last few years. Traditional IT leadership is worried about, quite frankly, covering their own butt, right? So is my email server, is it up and running? Am I keeping the finance guys from cutting my budget? Are they, is manufacturing going, they had 3 defects on the line. Are they going to come back and blame that on something I wrote? And I understand why leadership is like that. But the problem is with that mindset, you're never looking to go beyond what you're currently doing. So to break into innovation, you have to change IT from a cost center to a revenue center and prove that what I'm doing actually generates revenue. And there's various models and academic ways to do this. But the whole point is to change the mindset. I'm actually generating revenue for the company. I'm not spending the company's revenue. And that's how the Reader's Digest version of how I believe we changed that mindset.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. And I've seen that shift really over the last decade from kind of keeping the lights on, basically, to being that integral part of the business where they're invested not just in are the computers working and the servers working, but how can we invest back in the business, and they see us as an investment and not just a cost, right?
Right.
But it is a struggle. I talk to folks all the time, and they're looking at innovation. They're like, well, but things are okay right now. No one's yelling and screaming, and it's always that balance between maintaining the status quo and looking to do something that's going to bring more to the business. So I love that concept. That's great. You also mentioned digital disruption. What are some of the major components of digital disruption, and where does that play into the conversation?
Well, digital disruption to me means that you're not just adding to the end of the S curve, right? So some people think digital disruption is I have a 10 paper process and I'm going to automate 5 pieces of those papers so that I can say I do digital disruption. That's not true digital disruption. True digital disruption would be, and not to plug anybody, but some banks got rid of paper and you can apply for accounts online and not even go inside of a branch. So you have to think of the larger concept of what you're disrupting and how you're going to disrupt it. Just automating application processes is not disruption, but how do you change your business, right? So a good example of that is the electric cars. I mean, Ford had the ability to disrupt that whole business, but they went back to the premise that we talked about earlier. They did a return on investment and said it would take 30 years. But nobody realized that if we don't do this, we're going to lose the whole next generation of cars. And that's what we're seeing right now. And everybody is probably spending double what they expected to catch up. So the whole point is disruption is look at your business and technologists don't tend to be great disruptors because as leaders we don't want to create havoc. We like peace and we like things that are consistent. So you need someone who has understanding of technology and is looking outside of the company to do the disruption and figure out what is really the next way that we're going to process this business. I mean, mortgages. I mean, if you think about it, the amount of digitation that's going on in mortgage creation is enormous, and that is going, and you're getting away from the third party vendors, and people are going direct to consumer. 20 years ago, that probably wasn't a thought process, right? So, to me, disruption is beyond taking the new shiny toy out there.
Right. Yeah, that's great, Rocky. I love the concept there. And there is a big difference between just digitizing the analog versus looking at wholesale changes that are going to disrupt and rejuvenate the business. So I love the concept there. That's great. We're close to the end of our time. I do want to ask you one final question, though, since our show is Tech Champions. Can you give me a characteristic, at least one, that you think it takes to become a tech champion?
So there's so many, but the one that I like the most is that don't be a technologist looking for a problem. Find a real problem and go solve it. Just because there's a new piece of software out there, that doesn't mean you need to solve it with that. Find out what the real problem is, and if you solve that, then you become a tech champion.
Okay, I like that. That's great. Well, Rocky, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a great interview. You provided a lot of great content for our audience. If people wanted to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me at in my birth name, which is Roque Martinez. And I'm on LinkedIn. I have probably 1,000, 2,000 connections, so I'm probably easy to find. And I accept most everybody, unless you're trying to really hard sell something to me. But I'm there on LinkedIn.
Okay, great, Rocky. Thank you for the spelling. It took me a minute to find you there as well. So thanks again for being on the show. And to our audience, I'm your host, Daniel Beaty. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time on Tech Champions.